All right, in this video, we're going to walk through how to set up your development environment to work on Python. So what I have here is a new Windows OS. So again, what the steps we're going to talk about here will work for multiple different operating systems. So you just have to follow the steps related to your OS. There may be a few things that are a little bit different, but overall, the process will be the same. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to go ahead and determine if we have Python. So we're going to look for Python first. And the way we're going to do that is open up a terminal window or a command window on Windows. So I'm going to come up here and type CMD. If you're on Linux or you are on a Mac OS, you would have the terminal. But since I'm on Windows, I'm going to run the command prompt this way. So once you get to a command prompt, you're just going to want to type Python. The word Python with a space followed by -- version and hit enter. And if you see an error such as what I'm seeing here, Python is not recognized or some other related message, this tells me that Python is either not installed or it's not in the path. So what we want to do is go ahead and add that into the path or actually install it. So we're going to go ahead and install that. Let me close that down. I'm going to come to my browser. And I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to skip through all of these startup steps here and close that down and just come up here to a browser and I'm going to type in Python. And what you're going to find here is you'll get some type of response back depending on where you ended up as far as your searching. So here what I'm seeing is I see this Python org downloads. That's essentially the path we're going to look for. But just look for python.org/downloads. And if you're searching for it, this is what the screen looks like. This changes quite often, so it may look different by the time you actually watch this video. But this is the idea: is you'll go to python.org/downloads, and then you're going to download Python, whatever version is, as long as it's version 3 or later. That is generally fine. At the time of this recording, the latest version is 3.11, and that'll be fine. If you have it installed on your machine already, then you can use it as long as it's like 3.8 or later, should be fine. So if you happen to already have it installed, you can skip past this. But if you don't, like I do here in this box, I'm going to go ahead and click the download and open that file up. Give it a second. All right, you go ahead and install now. Make sure you add it to the path, so otherwise you won't be able to use it without actually going through a couple extra steps. Then we're going to click install now. Let it go through its steps. All right, for me, setup was successful. That looks good. I'm going to close that down. I am also going to close the browser down. I'm going to come back to that command prompt again and open it back up. Just make sure you open up a new one. If you already had it open and you went and tried to install it and came back to the same command window, you might get an error message because it doesn't recognize it in that environment. So you have to restart and open up a brand new command prompt like I did here. Now if I go back and type Python with the space and then 2 dashes and the word version, I get back an error message such as, or a message such as this. This looks good. So that means that I have Python ready to go on my environment. The next step would be to install Visual Studio Code, which we'll do that next. All right, I'm going to come up here to my browser again, open it back up. And this time I'm going to type in Visual Studio Code. And that should take me to a page which will allow me to scroll down and see this is the path I'm looking for, code visualstudio.com/download. I'm going to go to downloads. From here, I'm going to choose the one that matches the OS that I'm on. So in my case, I'm on Windows, so I'm going to click this option. And it's going to go ahead and start that download. Once it's done, you're going to go ahead and open up that file that I just downloaded. In my case, I'm getting an error message that is just telling me that I'm running this as an administrator. That's fine. You may or may not see a message similar to this depending on how you're logged into your OS. But I do see this message on Windows. So it's just a warning. We don't really need to worry about that for the purposes of what we're trying to do here. But go ahead and click OK. Accept the license agreement. Click Next. Keep going through all of these. I'm going to create a desktop icon. Click Next. Install. Click Finish. And we now have it installed. Let's go ahead and configure it next. All right, so Visual Studio Code is kind of becoming the most default, if you will, de facto editor that most folks are using these days. There are other editors out there, but what's nice about this particular editor is that obviously it's free. It's really well maintained, it's updated constantly, and it's fairly generic in terms of it can be extended to support many different types of languages. So in order for us to use this for Python, we have to do a couple things. First off, if it is the first time that you've run Visual Studio Code, then you're going to see something that allows you to select your defaults. I usually just pick the standard one here and go with that as far as what your layout is and your any other customizations you want to make. You're free to do that. But I'm going to leave that as is. I'm going to go ahead and maximize this. I'm going to close down the welcome page, and you're going to see a blank page here. So we're going to do a couple things to set this up for Python. First is we have to go over here to the extensions, and we're going to click extensions. And if you don't see it right away, you probably will if it's Python. Python's so popular. These are all extensions that can be added into Visual Studio Code. So if you're doing Python like we are, we're going to choose this extension. But if we were doing something like C++ or Node or any of these other languages or environments, there's extensions to support that particular type of programming environment. But for our purposes, we want to select the very top one here for Microsoft and go ahead and install that. And then this will allow us to be able to support the language. It'll have things that are nice as far as being able to see the syntax or how the language or the code looks. It'll be a certain way that it's easier for us to work with. And there's other things that you'll see that are also provided as part of this extension. All right, once that has been added, you can go back here and go ahead and close down that welcome page again. And the next thing we're going to do here is we are going to create a folder. So the best thing to do obviously is to come up here to File and select Open Folder and find a folder somewhere in your hard drive. I like to call mine Projects, so I'm going to select the C drive and select New Folder and call it Projects. And then I'm going to select that folder. Okay, and then once we do that, we're going to see the File Explorer show us our files, and then obviously you're going to get this message here about do you trust this particular folder, and folks are going to be out if you're going to be putting files in here. Do we trust what's going into this folder and where it's originating from? In our case, we're going to go ahead and say yes, we trust the authors. We'll be doing our own work here, but it's just more of a safety to make sure that we provide the necessary permissions to allow the correct access to files. But for our purposes, we're good with that. We're going to go here and we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it hello world.py. So py is the standard extension for Python. So as long as you name a file with a .py extension at the end, then that will kind of hook in the necessary extensions so that the Visual Studio Code editor will know, hey, I'm using the Python language here. And you can actually see that at the very bottom right, the language that it chose based on that extension. So as long as that says Python down here, and you have a py extension, we're good. Once you save it, you're going to see that this is going to turn into an editor window where we can type in commands. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and type in our first Python command, print, just like you see here. And we'll say hello world, and just like that, nothing else. This will be our first program that we're going to use Visual Studio Code for. All right. Once we have that, we're going to come up here to the terminal and select New Terminal. All right, and once you do that, the screen is going to split, and you're going to see a terminal window at the bottom. You're going to see your editor where you're going to make your file edits, and then you have your file explorer that you can turn on and turn off and hide. So if you toggle this, it'll hide and display that explorer. Sometimes it's nice to get it out of the way. One other thing I'll mention also, if you see a number 1 here, this simply means that we have unsaved changes. It's always important to make sure if we make changes in this file that we actually save them. Because right now this is showing us that we have not saved this file. I can go up here to the file menu and hit save, and then now that number 1 goes away, and all of the edits that I made in that editor window have now been saved. If you want to make life easier for yourself, there's even a better way. If you come up to the file menu and you come down to auto save, it will automatically save your file changes as you go. Some people like that, some people don't, but it is sometimes nice because I always forget to save my changes when I'm making them. All right, now we have our editor here. What I'm going to do to test this out is I'm going to type dir because I'm on Windows. If you're on Linux or Mac OS, you would do an ls, so I can see my hello world.py file there. And in order to run this, I'm just going to type the word Python space followed by the name of the file, hello world.py. All right, so I'm going to go ahead now and hit enter, and if I see hello world, then everything is set up correctly. Now Visual Studio Code is set up. I have Python set up. I'm now ready to begin working in Python. The last thing we want to set up before we're ready to begin doing coding is we're going to want to set up Git. And if you're not familiar with what a Git is, essentially is a distributed version control system. And if you're doing anything in modern development, using anything with open source, you're going to want to have access to be able to pull down files and directories and repositories that are out there. One of the most popular ones that's out there is something called GitHub. So there's GitHub and then there's Git, and they're kind of related but not the same thing. So just to kind of clarify what the difference between the two is, GitHub is an application, it's a website that people use to store software. So you can use it, you can set up your own environment if you want, and you can put repos up there, and you can access those repositories and have all your source code there for people to look at, and you can make it public or private. You can decide to have your own private repository, and it's a nice convenient way to be able to maintain software under version control, which means we keep track of it, we can make changes, and we have a history of all the changes we made. And then also when you're talking about using this in an environment where multiple teams or team members will be using the same code base or making changes to it, having a version control system is important. So Git is actually the kind of underlying technology or framework that GitHub sits on top of. Git actually was developed by the same person who developed Linux, by the way. Just a little tidbit there. So it's been around for a while, very, very popular. And anywhere you're doing development, you're going to want to have access to this. So first thing is, let's go down and just confirm whether or not you have it or not. So same thing we did with Python. We're going to bring up the command prompt or terminal window and just type in git get. And if you type it and you get back, like I do here, an error message saying that's not installed, that's not recognized, that tells me that I do not have access, I do not have that utility installed. So let's go ahead and install that. So I'm on the download page here for Git, and I'm going to come here to my operating system. I'm on Windows. I'm going to select that. I'm going to select the appropriate installer. I'm on a 64-bit OS, so I'm going to select that one. I'm going to go ahead and let that download. It'll take a second for it to pull down that installer. All right, once it's done, I'm going to go ahead and select Open, which should open up the installer to begin the process of installing the utility on my desktop. give it a second for that to come up. All right, once it comes up, go ahead and select next. You can just go through the defaults here. There's nothing, you can, obviously if you really care, you can read through all the steps here. I typically just go through the defaults. For the most part, it works for what we need it for. Go ahead and go through that, select all that. Let it go through and install the utilities. All right, I don't want to launch it. We don't need to see the README notes. All right, now Get is installed. So if I go back down to another terminal window, reopen it, and type get -- version, just like we did with Python. All right, we get back telling us that we actually have it installed correctly. So if you get a message that looks similar to this, then you have Get installed. All right, so now that we have that, we're able to then go to sites like GitHub. For example, I can try that real quick and show you. So if I go to GitHub and select that option, I'm just going to browse through open source, just pick something here. We'll just pick some repositories or trending, just pick one. Okay, there we go. We'll just pick this repository. This is just an example. This is a repository, so this is somebody's code base for PowerShell, and we can come down here now that we have Get, and we can select the GitHub repo. So this is actually its location. So you can kind of see every repository has a unique location, and when you set up your repo, you'll select the name you want to give it and what for, and it'll have all that for you. So this is the location specifically to get back to this code base here. So if I want to take all this code and put it on my workstation, I just have to go in here and copy this URL to the clipboard. And then if I go back to my terminal window and to where I'd get, I can just type in git clone followed by that specific URL that we just looked at. And git clone is the way to say go out into this repo and clone it or pull down all of the files. Hit enter on that, and it'll retrieve all of those objects. Okay, now if I do a dir, I can see that I should have a PowerShell folder. So so when you clone a directory, it automatically creates a directory. When you clone a folder, I should say, a repo, it automatically creates a repository, a directory name with the same name as the repository. So I can now type in PowerShell, and if I do a dir in here, I can see all of those same files. So all of those files are now locally on my local workstation. I can make changes to them. I can do whatever I want, and if I want, I can even commit these changes back to that repository, and there's a whole process involved with that. So if you really want to get more comfortable with Git, definitely will encourage you to learn more about it. But for right now, for our purposes, we have this now installed. So we now have Python, we now have an editor, Visual Studio Code, and we now have Git. So we can actually pull down repositories that are out there that someone created. So we can use that to pull down different types of tutorials. We can actually create our own repositories and push our code back there. So now we have a complete environment that's ready to go. So to bring this all together, we're just going to walk through a quick little scenario here so you can kind of see kind of what your workflow would be like. So what I have here is an existing repository out on GitHub, 30 Days of Python, which is a repo that has been put together that has a lot of example code for learning Python. And it gives you something to try each day, 30 days. So we can go into each one of these, and you can kind of see up here, if I'm looking through the website, you can kind of see I've got all the code here. Here's one that just is hello world. It's got a bunch of commands in here to get started, and you can see all these details. There's quite a bit inside of this repo that we can go through. So you can definitely go through this and learn Python, and if you really are interested in getting into Python at a much more in-depth level. But my point here is that first thing, if I wanted to then take this repository and start working on it in my local environment, how do I do that? Well, let's go through that step. So first thing we'll do is we're going to click on the repository itself at the highest level. So this is 30 days. So once you get here, you should see an option to go ahead and clone it. So I'm going to go ahead and clone that. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. I'm going to go back into my desktop here, and I'm going to bring up a terminal window. All right, and I am going to navigate to my projects folder. Remember, I created a projects folder when we first started. All right, and if I do a dir, I can see I have nothing here except for my hello world.py file that I created earlier. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that. All right, so there's no files there. So now I'm going to go ahead and do a get clone, and I'm going to paste in that URL for 30 days of Python and hit enter. All right, now that I'm done, I can do a dir. I can see now I have a directory called 30 days of Python. So what I can do is cd into 30 days of Python, new folder. I can see all the files there. All right, that's good. So I have everything. The easiest way to open up Visual Studio Code next would be to either you could do it from the command line itself or from the desktop by selecting that option. But what I like to do, it makes it a little easier, is if you're in a folder where you want to open up Visual Studio Code, just type the word code and put a period, and that will open up Visual Studio Code in that folder. All right, there you go. So you can kind of see now I have all of those samples that we were seeing earlier on the web. I have them here. I can look at them. I can make changes to them. And if I want to, I can actually run them. So let's do that next. So we'll come up here to the terminal, select new terminal, split the window. So I have my editor at the top. I've got my file explorer on the left-hand side, and I've got my terminal window down here. So if I do a dir, I can see all the files. So if I cd into 01 introduction and do a dir, I can see that I have one file in there, hello world.py. So now I get to Python, it's followed by hello world.py, hit enter. And there we go. So I've got the output based on whatever this particular sample tutorial was giving me. So it's just spitting out some data and class information. So I've got some output. So there you have it. So this is how you would go through, clone a repo, make changes, and edit them within Visual Studio Code. So now you have a complete working environment for you to do your development in. All right. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next time.